Okay, so two things for tonight. I'd like to talk about some financial and monetary policy. So, yes, I've got all sorts of things to say about metaphysics and spirituality and all sorts of big picture things happening. But I also have some pragmatic suggestions that might help us, I don't know, maybe just turn this ship around, get it headed in a better direction. So, the first thing that I think that we should all really get on board in terms of advocating for is a flat tax. A flat tax of 20%. All right? And we could include capital gains with that as well. And the reason to do this is that progressive taxation has by and large been turned into sort of this twisted way whereby which all these very powerful and wealthy corporations and business people are essentially not paying taxes, right? So there's all these different tax loopholes and tax laws and tax regulations and this and that. And I'm certainly not an expert. I'm sure that there are all sorts of people who could talk about financial policy and tax policy and get into other nuances here, which perhaps escape me and other people. But it seems to me that a lot of what's happening is that the complicated progressive taxation system is actually being sort of used, being perverted by the very people that it was meant to restrain. And so that if we just had a across the board flat tax, I suspect that government revenues would be greatly increased by that. And it's a policy that more conservative and libertarian minded people should be able to generally get on board with because it speaks more to their concept of economic fairness, right? The idea of having us all pay 20% wherever you are in the economic scheme, however much money you make. So it's something I think we can get everyone on board with, and it will give us a lot more revenues and also at the same time be something then that more conservative or libertarian people can get behind as well. So the second thing has to do with currency. And this is a strange thing to be advocating because I'm not really a huge believer in financial policy in general. Personally, my ideal world would be one where we didn't really have money very much, where people are doing things for more altruistic reasons, or at least there's some kind of maybe more socially oriented economy, right? It's not so much about individual profit, but more about collective community building, right? But I think that clearly we see that another one of the big problems that is facing us is that there's all this fiat currency, right? So because money is no longer backed by solid metals, by gold or silver, we have just endless amounts of inflation. And that's not to say that that wasn't a problem before. It certainly was. Of course, that had more to do back in the days with debasing the currency, right? Decreasing the amount of precious metals in the monetary supply. That'd be the way in which a lot of inflation would happen in the past. But now it's just buck wild. We all know that this is kind of a huge issue. And again, I'm not really advocating for the worshiping of gold or silver or precious metals. And this isn't really ultimately sort of the society that I think we want, that I want, one that is obsessed with money or precious metals. But for the purposes of restraining certain financial shenanigans, the endless printing of money, inflationary economics, which is really what a lot of the sort of negative oligarchical corporate forces in the world use, in addition to abusing progressive taxation in order to enrich themselves, to give themselves more power. Now, an important thing here is that it can't just be gold, right? You might be vaguely familiar with some late 19th century conflict that happened in America William Jennings Bryan especially. But there were other people who were advocating for silver currency in addition to gold. And that's an important thing, right? Okay? It can't just be gold, okay? The powers that be do have a bit of a stranglehold even on the gold supply. But there's a lot more silver in the world. And to be honest, for most of human history, silver was in fact the most important precious metal. And the majority of metal that was used to back the various currency systems of all of these countries going back thousands and thousands of years was silver. So it's important to have both gold and silver being available. So there isn't too much of a restriction, too much of a monopoly around gold. The powers that be started accumulating more and more gold, especially after the expansion of European power, after the Columbian Exchange, right? And that's why they slowly moved silver to the sidelines, because they had a strong control of the gold supply. So the important thing here is that when going back to a metal standard for the purpose of restraining a lot of these financial shenanigans, okay, that we use both gold and silver as part of this new retroactive metal standard. So really, I think these are pragmatic, easy to implement policies that both liberals and conservatives can get behind. A simple 20% flat tax, including capital gains across the board, no more progressive taxation, no more complicated schemes. And if you want to get rid of more bureaucracy, if you want to cut down on the IRS and other things like that, this would also be a good opportunity to do that. Of course, there's a huge tax industry, which very much would not like to see this happen. And this is always a problem that we have, these entrenched forces and groups that don't want to give up their piece of the pie. Even though oftentimes the pie that we're making is not really the best pie for everyone. And with metal currency again, we just have too much inflationary spending, too much fiat currency, too much reckless debt spending, right? And to try and encourage more responsible fiscal policy and to cut down on stock market speculation and sort of the inflationary shenanigans that go on around that, which really help the wealthy corporate oligarchical forces accumulate more money or get an even bigger percentage of the pie, I should say, right? That's what inflation is all about, changing the value of money so that you can get a bigger and bigger percentage of the pie. And so flat tax, going back to a gold and silver standard, I think these are policies that people could get behind, and I think they could make a pretty big difference in cutting down on a lot of the financial shenanigans. Ugh. Can't ever say that word, right? That's the whole point of shenanigans, right? That all these corporate oligarchs use to run this ridiculous world. All right. Well, don't say that I don't have some pragmatic ideas. All right. Yeah, I love to talk about spirituality and metaphysics and universal energy signatures and the wonders of everything, the wonders of God. But I also have some pragmatic ideas too. Got the total package. So thank you for joining me tonight. I want you to know that I love you very much, and that God loves you very much. And that I'm sure that together, by compromising and putting our heads together, we can find our way out of the various messes, out of this swampy morass that we find ourselves here at the beginning of the age of Aquarius, at the dawn of the 3rd millennium AD. Many blessings. Much love. We'll see you soon.